Good afternoon. This is Shirley Havlin, HFMA Certification Administrator. Welcome to this HFMA webinar, Moving the Needle on Physician Engagement, a Metric-Driven Scorecard Approach, sponsored by Medi Analytics. It is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Michelle Morton. Michelle is Director of HIM Services for Hoag. Michelle oversees the Clinical Documentation Improvement Program for 3 acute care hospitals. With that, Michelle, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Shirley, for that introduction. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michelle Morton, and I work for Hoag Memorial Presbyterian here in Newport Beach. Hoag, a little background about Hoag. Hoag is a non-teaching short-term acute care facility. Our main hospital in Newport Beach has 518 acute inpatient beds. We do have 2 additional facilities, our Hoag Irvine location, also in acute care, and our Hoag Orthopedic Institute with 72 beds. You can see various information there on the screen about Hoag. One of the things that Hoag really likes to, is very proud of, is that we are the highest ranked hospital in Orange County. For 2019 and 2020. Once again, it was the 3rd year in a row we achieved this recognition. We were ranked 4th in the hospital in the Los Angeles metro area and the number 8 in California. For more than 65 years, Hoag has delivered a level of personalized care that's unsurpassed among Orange County's healthcare providers. And since 1952, Hoag has served our local community and continues its mission to provide the highest quality healthcare services through the core strategies of quality and service, people, physician partnerships, strategic growth, financial stewardship, community benefit, and philanthropy. Hoag is a nonprofit regional healthcare delivery network now in Orange County. We have our 3 hospitals, as I mentioned previously, 14 urgent care centers, 8, almost 9 health centers, and a network of over 1,700 physicians, and we employ more than 6,000 people in our area with over 2,000 volunteers. More than 30,000 patients, inpatients per year, and 450 outpatients. So we're a busy regional hospital in Orange County. We want to talk a little bit today about Hoag's journey in the clinical documentation improvement arena. And that's really why we're here today to meet. We began our journey with a CDI program in 2011. Currently, I have 5 dedicated CDI team members whose main focus is a clinical background but with a strong coding knowledge and credentials. We partner each of our CDI specialists with an inpatient coder so that they have a good rapport and can work collaboratively together day in and day out. We've developed a strong physician education program. And of course, because we've been doing this since 2011, we see a lot less of that low-hanging fruit. I think when most CDI programs start, you're capturing that acute blood loss anemia and all those little things that physicians aren't aware of. But, now that we're 9 years into our journey, we really are trying to impact and improve quality and risk adjust our patients in a much different manner. We really started to get a stronghold in our organization and adding value to our hospital's mission for quality by getting involved in clinical excellence commissions. And these were collaborative teams that were multidisciplinary, physicians, administrators, performance improvement specialists, to work together to really improve the outcomes for our organization. We have a philosophy that really starts and takes hold in that culture of accountability. It's really important that we as a CDI and coding team hold ourselves to the highest amount of accountability, but also our organization. And that's not always easy to do. A large portion of that requires that physician buy-in and participation. And I know a lot of organizations, especially here in California where our physicians are employed, you might have a more challenging time with that. So one of the things we started doing is creating scorecard data for our physicians and introducing best practices. It was important to us that they understood who we were, what we were trying to accomplish, and how they impacted those accomplishments. We constantly work to improve and make sure our best practice clinical documentation is shared with our physicians, that they have transparency into that, and that they're getting regular education. It's important to us to have cost transparency. If we have 5 surgeons all performing the same procedure and they have a different cost per case, it's important to understand where those transparencies lie. And then, of course, we want optimal patient health and outcomes, and we help making sure our coding reflects the care provided to our patients. And so it's very important that we're doing the best job with clinical documentation so it translates appropriately in the coding arena. And then, of course, rinse and repeat, right? We just keep going down this road over and over again until we've got that physician buy-in and participation, and that culture of accountability grows and gets stronger every day. One of the things that we do is look at the different metrics. And so to do that, we create physician scorecards, and we personalize it for them. And a lot of those scorecards includes information like case mix index, and we're able to use data analytics, a product that we use by MediAnalytics that helps include cohort data or data from other hospitals of similar size. We are very transparent with the query volume rates, the DRG bundles that they're impacting, their CC, NCC capture rate, what's a physician's average risk of mortality, average severity of illness, what secondary diagnosis usage are they using prevalently, where they have opportunities to improve. And so it's really important that physicians have the information in front of them so that they're able to understand what we're trying to accomplish on our roadmap. But don't get me wrong, there's always challenges. I think in the beginning we had a lot of physician participation reluctance, and I think a lot of that had to do with not really truly understanding what we're talking about. How many physicians know what a CMI is? Who understands a CC, NCC capture rate? In the CDI coding industry, HIM services, we speak a completely different language, a language that most of these clinicians have never had exposure to. And so the road begins in making sure they understand the language we're speaking and why that data is important to them. What is a case mix index? What is your CC and CC capture rate? Why is your average risk of mortality important to you? So one of the biggest hurdles was making sure that information was slowly, methodically shared with physicians so that they came to an understanding. And then they don't really understand the impact that they have on the organization. So sharing their impact was important as well, and those scorecards were extremely helpful. A lot of times physicians also believed that it was a waste of their time. Why do I need to be here doing this? Why is it important? And so being able to show the importance in how their documentation drives our quality reporting and do it in a meaningful way that they can grasp and understand was really the hallmark of our success. The scorecard really helps us stratify all the physicians. We're able to locate some of our top performers and our low performers. We're able to get in touch with low performers and explain the metrics and begin working on improving those numbers. And those scorecards allow us to show opportunities for improvement. We try not to make the scorecards too overwhelming, to include too many metrics. Sometimes when we're first engaging with a physician, we might only have 2 or 3 metrics on their scorecard. As they progress in the program and they become engaged with the process, we start to include other metrics that would be meaningful to them. So it's really, we had a funny story. We were using our data analytics, and we were looking at a DRG bundle and a particular physician who appeared to be underperforming. And we had almost $1 million in opportunity to improve performance. And so it was really important for us to dig in and figure out what was going on, because the data, it looked like, we had a huge problem. But interestingly enough, I think the one thing that's always important to keep in mind about data and sharing data with physicians is you really need to make sure that data's been vetted. So, we talk about the world of data points coming at you at 1 million miles an hour, and there's so many things to take into consideration. One of the things we always do before we present a physician scorecard is we vet and validate that data so that when we're having those physician conversations, it's meaningful to them. They understand. We're able to use specific instances. While we're vetting data, we may have specific cases that we share with the physician. We use their own language and their own words to help display opportunities where they may have fallen short. Interestingly enough, in this physician that looked like they were underperforming, we decided to dig in because we knew we thought, oh my gosh, we've got to get on top of this. And so we dug into the data. Well, it turned out one of the reasons why the DRG was performing so low is that there was a unique procedure we perform at Hoag, and it was insertion of a type of neurostimulator device we use. And it's a two-stage planned procedure. So part of the procedure occurs in the outpatient arena, and the second part occurs in the inpatient arena. And these patients, for the most part, wouldn't even qualify for the implantation unless they were otherwise healthy. And so really what we ended up finding out is the physician wasn't underperforming. He was actually doing just fine. He had a particular type of patient case mix that precluded us from really reporting additional CCs or MCCs in this otherwise healthy patient population. So that really is just one great example of making sure we didn't go running to a physician and say, okay, my data shows you're not looking great. Things got to change. We got to stop it. We've got to fix this. We ended up not even having to have that conversation because we felt there wasn't a problem. So vetting that data first before you have that conversation with the physician is of huge importance. You want to build trust with your physicians, and so to do that, you really have to make sure you're delivering a strong, vetted conversation with data that's meaningful. And to do that, you've got to put the time in. So let's talk a little bit about some of the data that Hoag uses in our tool with MediAnalytics. This is my dashboard or my landing page. This is kind of what I see every morning when I log in. And it just lets me track and trend and see how our case mix index is performing over a period of time. This isn't particularly Hoag data, but this is a great example of ways that we're able to monitor performance. When we have periods of time where a case mix index may be running too low, it gives us that opportunity to start drilling in. We correlate that case mix index often with our CC-MCC capture rate. Because we know things like surgical episodes can have a big variance or impact to your CMI, I can't necessarily control that data. But the one piece of data that I can continue to monitor and watch is that CC-MCC capture rate and how we're performing. It gives us that chance to just do that initial sniff test to see how things look and feel for the organization and what areas we may need to start focusing on further. Here's an example of a physician dashboard that we would use to kind of help monitor either an individual physician or an entire group. This is an example of the type of information that we find very powerful in helping us. In this particular instance, we are looking at a group of physicians that we created, say a hospitalist group. And in that left-hand side, we're comparing their performance, which is that red line, against other hospitals, so there are other internal medicine physicians in the organization. And we're able to see if they're performing at or above and compare each of the groups. And so that's helpful because a lot of times you do need to address things with a group of physicians, and so being able to monitor group performance is very helpful. On the right there, we have a group of cohorts that we compare ourselves to. Our cohort that we like to use is any hospital in the U.S., same bedside, obviously isn't a teaching hospital or trauma hospital. I think cohort data is really only meaningful when you compare yourself to other like organizations. But this gives us an idea on how we're performing compared to other cohorts that are similar to ourselves. It helps us kind of look to see, wow, are we doing a good job? Are we not doing a good job? It kind of gives us a little bit of validation. Or maybe in some instances it says, hey, it looks like we may have some opportunity. So that's one dashboard that can be very meaningful to have built to track either individual physicians or group physicians over a period of time when you're looking at their case mix index. This is an example of how we might be able to look at physicians in a particular group and compare their performance over a period of time. As you can see here in that first column, we're looking at their CC-NCC capture rate. We're able to compare it for the same period of time against a cohort CC-NCC capture rate to see if they're over or above. And then you can track it over a period of time. This is one way how we're able to measure performance. As you can see in the first example, that physician 1 had a 66.7% capture rate in December, but for some reason in January dropped. Now they're still above the cohort, which to us looks good, but it is curious as to why they had almost a 17% drop in their capture rate. So we would really want to drill down with this physician and kind of determine where their missed opportunities. Was it from a coding clinical documentation improvement perspective, or did the physician themselves, miss reporting important clinical documentation indications for a patient? Especially on those cases, I think any of us that run a clinical documentation improvement team or are familiar with the practices, you can't always get to everybody all of the time. Sometimes shorter length of stays preclude it, holidays, weekends. So it is always really important that on those cases that didn't get that CDI review, were we capturing the comorbidities correctly for that period of time? One of the things we also use this type of cohort comparison or this CC-MCC capture rate comparison is we will often run these reports prior to physician education or create the dashboards prior to physician education, and we'll keep notes as to when physician education was provided to a specific doctor. And it's nice to kind of see what you'd like to see, right, is that increase in that CC-MCC capture rate post-education. This is also can be sometimes fun to share with them so that they're able to see how they're performing. For those of you, too, just to circle back, make sure everybody is aware, a CC or NCC, those are those chronic conditions and complications or major complications or comorbidities. Those are those secondary diagnoses that can help drive your DRG assignment. A great example is, you have an otherwise healthy patient comes in with pneumonia. They may have a history of hypertension. They may have a history of asthma. And they are a relatively less complex patient. But oftentimes you'll see patients, maybe a similar patient comes in with hypertension and asthma, but that asthma becomes exacerbated and it creates an episode of acute respiratory failure for that pneumonia patient. That acute respiratory failure is your MCC. Those are the type of conditions our CDI team is working constantly with our physicians to ensure those secondary major complications or comorbidities are captured. Capturing of those CCs and MCCs is really essential to risk adjusting your patients. I think a lot of CDI programs, when we first start out, we're really gung-ho on, okay, how much additional revenue is the work we're doing bringing in? I think because Hoag's been so involved and entrenched in the CDI program since 2011, our perspective has completely changed from how much revenue we're capturing to really how are we risk adjusting and capturing those secondary comorbid conditions that are so important in making sure our quality metrics are reported appropriately. And what we tend to find is when we always take that quality risk adjustment approach, the right reimbursement follows. And so we don't normally have to start a conversation about reimbursement. We really start the conversation about how are we capturing that severity of that patient. And then we are, reimbursed appropriately for the resources that we consume to treat them. It all works hand in hand. We're just able to take that quality approach as our conversation starter. One of the things we love to do with our tool is to really analyze the data. In our work with our clinical excellence commissions, we create clinical bundles in our data analytic tool with Medi to help us monitor and watch those bundles, how they perform over time. We may be tackling a particular diagnosis like, say, sepsis, and we start doing extensive physician education and making sure physicians are using the EHR appropriately and the tools provided in the EHR for them to be capturing those comorbidities. Creating those clinical bundles allows us to kind of follow and monitor that data over a period of time so we can see how it's performing. We recently did do some sepsis education, and of course it was during the summer months. And so we were really excited to continue to watch our data and say, okay, let's see this month, did we do better? And it was funny, we had a drop. And so everybody was disappointed because we had put a lot of work and effort, but again, it really goes to that validating and verification of your data. When we looked and thought, wow, why did we drop after all that education? One of the things we found, we just really didn't have the type of sepsis cases that were severe. We weren't seeing shock. We weren't seeing those secondary conditions. And so it made sense. As much as it hurt us, as much as the data didn't look the way we wanted it to, the data made sense because we were able to drill down onto it. One of the things I love, too, is the tool allows us to drill into those DRGs that we're looking at and compare those secondary conditions, those CC, MCCs, and how we're performing compared to our cohort. And again, we validate that, right? So maybe we are looking at that sepsis, that 871, 872, and wow, we're reporting a lot less acute CHF compared to our cohort. Are we missing a documentation opportunity? Or is that information we're reporting true and accurate and we just see fewer acute exacerbations during that clinical care for a patient with sepsis? And so it's always important for us to drill and look, start reviewing charts, see where opportunities may or may not exist. When we're analyzing the data, we always make sure we're looking at hospital peers and cohort benchmarks. What would we like to see? How would we like to see a physician improve? Part of that culture of accountability is providing clear benchmarks so everybody understands what the objective or goal is. And we like to look at physician performance by their specialty, right? So I'm not going to compare my internal medicine physicians to my surgeons. That data would never make sense. It wouldn't be a great comparison. So we like to make sure those comparisons are like to like. It makes that sharing of information easier for the physicians to understand and more helpful for them. So here's a great example of how we can drill down a little bit on physician performance, or this is actually similar to a previous slide when we are looking at a physician that may be falling below a specific case mix index performance for a particular bundle that we've been working on. That green line above is all of our hospitalist groups. So we're comparing a peer here. We're comparing our hospitalist groups against our other internal med groups and kind of trying to figure out why there's some disparity in how their CC-MCC capture rate is. What physicians love, I think people in general, we're competitors. We love to compare ourselves to others and see how we're doing. So using scorecards with physicians like this that allows them to compare themselves against their peers as well as against the cohort is always extremely valuable to them. They like to see how they're performing compared to others. And so this type of drill down on this physician performance is what makes us the data meaningful to them. In this particular case, as you can see again, what we're looking at is our CC-MCC rates compared to a cohort there. So why is data important, right? I always tell people when they come to me and they say, we've got a problem. We do? Show me. When we don't use data, conversations we have are often anecdotal. I think having data to support your stance and your initiatives and your objectives is extremely helpful. For the first time meeting physicians, it allows them to understand and see what we're attempting to present to them. That data is real, it's meaningful. It's not, hey, doc, you're not doing good, you're not documenting well, you have poor performance. This data is that conversation driver with them. And again, I can't reiterate, I think I've already touched on this before, but data is just data when it stands on its own. We'll talk a little bit later on when we get to that physician education and some of the tools that we use, because we don't just use a scorecard. We'll talk about why it's important for it not to just stand on its own. And it always needs context, and we need to make sure that it's meaningful to them and that they understand it. And again, this is that example that we spoke about earlier for our physician where we thought there was a huge opportunity, and by drilling down into that data and not letting it stand on its own, not just going out and approaching that doctor and saying, hey, we have a problem, we were able to understand better why Hoag looked different when we compared ourselves to a cohort. Physician education. This is my favorite part of my job. This is one of the areas where I think I am most passionate about. I think anybody who's interacted with physicians know that when they go through medical school, they just don't get any type of education into the business aspects of being a doctor, whether it's running their own practice or it's working for an organization like Hoag. They just don't get that exposure to coding and all these different initiatives that help drive quality improvement in an organization. And so when you first approach a doctor and you want to talk about coding in CDI performance and their metrics, you usually don't even understand what language you're speaking, and oftentimes really aren't receptive. And so one of the things we did is we said, just give us 10 to 15 minutes of your time. We'll meet on your territory, wherever you want to meet, and let's just dive in and kind of look and see what we've got going here. What we do is always build a scorecard for them. It includes those metrics we talked about earlier, their case mix index, their CC-MCC capture rate, average length of stay, where they're looking on their risk of mortality and severity of illness, their query volumes. We use information in Meta-Analytics tool to help kind of drive what DRGs we may need to focus on for them. We can drill down into those DRGs, look at the claims level, look at any outliers they have, review those outlier charts, and start to pick apart and identify those documentation opportunities where they could do a better job. We'll take those charts with us, just a page or two from each chart. We'll show them tangible examples, how one or two words could have really made a difference when documenting a particular condition. Great example might be anemia, right? In a patient who's post-op was that acute blood loss anemia, how those simple additional words to their current documentation can change and drive their quality performance. We'll review their scorecards with them, and we always circle back with them. Once we develop this relationship, we'll circle back with them each quarter to sit down and do another 15-minute conversation. We try to always keep these meetings to only 2, maybe 3 topics at a time. You can't open a flood hose and just give them a ton of information all in one sitting. They just can't absorb it. You kind of have to, using your data, drill down and figure out what are the top 2 or 3 things that would give me the most bang for my buck in this conversation. So it's important for us to keep the conversation succinct. What's interesting, though, is we often say, we finally get engaged, we get the 15 minutes of their time, and when we put these materials down in front of them, they don't want to stop talking. That 15 minutes almost always is at least 30 to 45 minutes. Once you start engaging them, explaining to them, showing them, using their documentation and showing how simple changes can make huge improvements, they're engaged. They want to keep learning. They want more. It's very rare for a physician to ever refuse a next subsequent meeting in the following quarter with us. I think the only time we get turned down is because somebody's on vacation, and we'll try to follow up as soon as possible thereafter. But these scorecards, along with this information, really helps speed things, engage those conversations and get them wanting to participate more. This is an example right here of a scorecard. Here's typical information that we might share with them. And again, we're looking at the risk of mortality, severity of illness. If you look down that bottom left-hand corner, you'll see their case mix index performance. All these different lines kind of display a comparison, usually of them against their specialty. And oftentimes we can also include it against a cohort depending on how we like to build the scorecards. So it gives them that ability to see how they're doing compared to their peers, compared to a cohort. To really sum it up, it's really important to have some great, strong best practices in place. Again, you have to have that data-driven transparency. You have to be able to reinforce that reducing your spend does not require sacrificing quality. And that may not be a conversation I have on my own, but that can be supported by other members of the clinical teams and clinical leadership. We often have to, during these clinical effectiveness councils, reveal the cost implications of different treatment choices. And again, we're there to always support those clinical teams in those conversations. And we're always encouraging best practice clinical documentation. And the best way to do that is through creating benchmarks and constantly sharing data that people now understand, speak that language, and are able to look at and know how they're performing. And we always need to be partnering with our physicians to make meaningful change. And we use those physician partnerships to help engage physicians, other physicians who maybe don't want to participate. We might get one of the doctors in a group engaged in that 15-minute education. They see the value in it, they love it, and they start talking to the other physicians in their group. And soon enough, they're calling us and asking us, they want to see their data. That data and that competition, those comparisons to each other and comparisons against the cohort always seem to spark a strong interest. So build trust, develop familiarity. Remember, folks, they don't speak our language, so we've got to teach them that language. Try to use language that's familiar to that physician. And then again, we continually share data to help drive that change. Making it actionable is important. Setting goals and benchmarks for that physician helps them understand what they're trying to achieve and what they're trying to reach. And of course, cooperations with physicians, it delivers positive outcomes. I can't do what I'm doing right now without the use of the analytics. It just probably would be too much of an anecdotal conversation. So having analytics to help us drive these conversations has just been such a supportive way to help engage our community. We have to monitor and track physician education. And again, we are always driving clinical program performance, whether it's improvements with changes to the ICD-10. Hey, folks, it's October 2nd, right? So IPPS just went into place yesterday. So what changes do we need to share with our physician community to ensure that they're driving the best documentation? We've used these data analytics to help improve sepsis bundles, pneumonia performance. And again, it helps us identify opportunities for physician documentation and the use of proper secondary diagnoses. One of the things I always say is you have to identify physician champions, and you have to have leadership involvement. I don't have just one physician champion. I have many, and many of those occurred over time because we were able to create that relationship. And in those 15-minute conversations, they became so engaged that they really wanted to participate, and they started becoming active leaders in our charge in the clinical documentation improvement realm. You have to have a dedicated team, that we have to be on the same page. Our CDI team meets weekly as a group. Again, I think as I discussed earlier in the presentation, they're heavily engaged with the coding program. The two are well intertwined. We have to keep our scorecards really simple, familiar, and personalized to each physician. And of course, we're always celebrating their improvements. So that's really, really important for us to do. And when we start to look for the future, we want to look towards perhaps automation of some of these repeatable data analysis that we perform. That would be extremely helpful. Right now, the tool is wonderful, but it's constant monitoring and manipulating of that, but it works well. We want to create data insights, perhaps that could be delivered directly to the users. Mechanism in which physicians may receive that quarterly scorecard in their email to help set up or engage for the next education. And then, of course, we want to use data and artificial intelligence, of course, to identify areas of opportunities, forecast the future, and look for any type of anomalies that may be occurring in our data or our claims data. So artificial intelligence, I know, is kind of the wave of the future, and I think it's something that can be very helpful in looking at how we can use that artificial intelligence to automate and make this process even work better than it does today. And I think with that will end the presentation. I'm going to hand things back to Shirley. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Great presentation. Michelle, we have a couple of questions. Does the program cover all patients or just DRG-based payers?
Currently, right now, our program has a heavy focus on DRG payers, but actually our top priorities are any patient who might fall into a core measure. And so we do work with our core measure teams, and we participate also in the BPCIA bundled payment system right now with Medicare, and so we have a heavy focus on those patients as well. They're our top priority.
Thank you. Another question. How do you obtain the cohort data?
Medi-Analytics has a tool we use called Revenue Optimization Compass, and part of the use of that data analytics tool is the ability to pull other cohorts or other facilities that use the tool as well. So we all become part of a cohort essentially, and using that tool allows me to see how other like hospitals compare to Hoag.
Thank you. How do you track the progress over time?
The first thing we always do to track that progress over time is we really create a dashboard for physicians. So in our tool, revenue optimization, we have tons of dashboards created that are kind of run in the background. And so we can create one. So say we do physician education for Dr. Shirley. What we do is we create a a dashboard that tracks their progress from the time of education, so that we're able to show them how they're performing over a period of time. So the creation of those private individual dashboards is extremely helpful.
Okay, thank you. Another question here. What physician group was most reluctant to adopt these measures? For example, millennials versus boomer physicians.
Okay, so millennials will jump right in. They love data. We don't have too many struggles with some of the younger physicians. I think, too, the younger physicians during their residency programs have exposure to CDI. Our biggest challenges have been with our older physician population, kind of these folks that have been doing this for a long time, and you just say the word coding, and their eyes cross, and they don't even want to talk. So I think our biggest challenge has been with the older group, and I think generally too when we look at physician specialties, I think surgeons too are a little bit more reluctant to engage. I think they often kind of have that philosophy, well, I've got a hospitalist on my case, and they'll take care of all that. And so the two groups are older physicians and perhaps surgeons.
Great, thank you. What would you say the hardest part of getting the physicians to buy in was, and how was that overcome by Hoag?
I think the hardest part is their time is important to them, and they don't think any of this applies to them. So a lot of times it's that promise, we'll keep it short, sweet, and simple. Sometimes it's engaging with our physician champion to kind of nudge the physician to participate. And other times, if a physician's really struggling and the performance is concerning, it's a nudge from our administration. It can vary. I really don't like the nudges to come from administration. We try to find other ways to actively engage them so they don't feel like they have to do this. So generally speaking, we usually start with, hey, we'll make it short, we promise. Or again, we try to get one of our physician champions to use their relationships to help influence.
I apologize. We have another question. How did you win the older physicians over? What techniques were used?
Well, again, I think with the older physicians, it really was relying on our relationships with our physician champions. And a lot of times, instead of doing a one-on-one education session, we would bring that physician champion along with us. And that seemed to be the most effective way to win them over. A little bit of peer pressure never hurt anyone.
Another question is, how would you present the data to them so that they are more receptive to it?
Well, one of the things is we noted in the demonstration of the scorecard. So I know for the purpose of a PowerPoint presentation here on a webinar, it may look a particular way, but we print them out in color. We have a toolkit that we've designed, our CDI team, our primary educator, we have a toolkit that they use. So if we're really trying to focus on, say, respiratory failure, we'll bring the educational slide from that toolkit on respiratory failure, and then we'll bring one or two chart examples for that physician and show where they were documenting respiratory failure, but not to the degree of specificity that was demonstrated clinically, and how changing a simple diagnosis of respiratory failure to acute respiratory failure would have impacted that patient, and how it would impact their CMI. Well, a lot of times we'll take that exact chart and create a case study. We'll show what the impact to the DRG weight is, coding just as respiratory failure unspecified versus acute respiratory failure.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
Do you have, we're going to be wrapping up here. Do you have any closing remarks for our attendees on the call today?
I think that the best thing I can say is, from a successful CDI standpoint, develop and create those physician relationships, identify your physician champions, have more than one. You don't have to hang your hat on a single physician champion. Find ways in your organization to add value. I know from a Hoag perspective, it only took one clinical effectiveness commission meeting for them to fall in love with the type of data that we were able to provide to them using our meta-analytics tool. That made us meaningful. That made us always present at the table, so that while we were trying to tackle things not only from a clinical standpoint, we were also given the opportunity to tackle it from a clinical documentation standpoint to improve the organization's performance and reimbursement based on how we're clinically documenting. And really, that your CDI team, make sure they have the right objectives, create meaningful metrics for them to follow. Make sure they're out on the floors and rounding. You know, we have a kind of a rule. You got to be up on the floor. I know we often spend a lot of our time behind our computers reviewing charts and issuing queries, but you've got to develop those meaningful physician relationships, and being up on the floor and just checking in with the physician and seeing how they're doing helps create that acknowledgement and that acceptance when it is time to engage with physician education. They know who we are. So making sure we're available and visible within the organization. Outside of that, it's pull up your sleeves and work hard, use your data to help point you in the right direction, dive in, validate, and repeat day in and day out.
Thanks, Michelle. Great presentation.
Thank you.
We have reached the conclusion of today's webinar presentation, and I would like to thank Michelle Morton for presenting and meta-analytics for sponsoring this very timely presentation. If you have further questions about this webinar, you may email them to HFMA's Resource Center at resourcecenter@hfma.org. Our Resource Center staff will assist with questions not answered during the webinar. Be sure to sign up for upcoming webinars via the website at hfma.org. Thank you for your participation and have a great day.